To review and approve the agenda, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Comments from the public. The board has set aside time at the beginning and end of regular meetings for public comments for members of the public to share their views on matters involving the Wilton Public Schools and to help inform the board's decisions on such matters. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to any one subject. For the record, please also give your name and address. The board considers the views of citizens in its deliberations and welcomes and appreciates public comment. The board listens to public comment thoughtfully and with interest. The board, however, generally does not respond to public comment during board meetings by offering commentary or answering questions. The board also invites commentators and the public to contact the board or the superintendent directly with specific questions or comments. The board, through the chair and the superintendent, may respond to questions and comments offered during public comment or share directly. And in responding, may also direct members of the public to appropriate staff members for a response. Are there any public comments? Lucille?
There's not on that.
Okay. Consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Unanimously carried. Board Chair's report. Good evening, everyone. At our last meeting on February 16th, the board, with 5 members present, unanimously passed the superintendent's proposed budget. The budget represents a 4.5% increase over this year's spending and is the largest request in recent history. The request is a reflection of both the current economic and inflationary environment and the necessary resources to sustain and advance the mission and values of a Wilton education. On March 15th at 7:30, the Board of Finance will discuss both the BOE and the BOS budgets. The public is encouraged to either attend or view the meeting. I will be there. I also invite everyone to attend and participate in the Board of Finance public hearing on the Board of Education budget. The public hearing is on Monday, March 27th at 7:30 in the Middlebrook Auditorium. At the hearing, as board chair, I will present the board's budget. Following the presentation, the Board of Finance may ask questions and members of the community may give comments. The Board of Finance has also set its budget deliberation meeting dates for April 3rd, 4th, 10th, and 11th at 7:30. Again, the public is encouraged to attend or view the meetings, and again, I will be there. The fiscal year 2024 annual town meeting is expected to be held on Tuesday, May 2nd, with adjourned voting following the meeting, and on Saturday, May 6th. Tomorrow morning, all are invited to participate in a community conversation on mental health at 9:15 at the YMCA. The presentation and discussion will focus on the current mental health landscape, what mental health includes, signs and concern in youth and adults, and when to reach out for help and who to contact. Dr. Andrew Gerber, Silver Hill President and Medical Director, will give a keynote address, followed by a panel discussion and audience questions. More information and free registration can be found at the Wilton Youth Council website. Also, on Tuesday, March 7th at 7 p.m. at the Middlebrook Auditorium, the Middlebrook PTA and the Wilton Public Schools are sponsoring an evening with Scott Driscoll on the ever-changing world of internet and social media. Registration is free and can be found through the Middlebrook PTA website. Thank you. Superintendent.
Great. 2 updates. The first, you, I'm sure, are aware, in the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 families experience significant tragedies with the loss of their father. So I just wanted to take a minute and acknowledge the Price family, the Salento family, and the Keogh family. And our administrators have been in touch. I know their teachers have been in touch too, but just, it's a tough time for them. And so we want to just let them know that we're carrying them in our hearts. It's a tough time. The second update I have for you is just on the capital bonded proposal. So this has been refined, and it's going to the Board of Selectmen on Monday, I believe. And so there's nothing new or different here with capital bonded. We've been carrying proposed funds to continue the roof replacement program, so you'll see that that carries out. The next targeted roof is the primary, they refer to as kind of the center roof in the middle part of the building at Middlebrook School, and so there's a bid out for that now. We're carrying these lines for now because they were in the previous bonded capital request. So we've set aside some funds to address the ceiling tiles, floor tiles, lighting, etc. And then there is another line here called school infrastructure replacements and upgrades, and that's really speaking to some of the HVAC needs. So these are subject to change, and they're subject to change because Jeff Pardo, who does double duty for facilities for both the town and the board, has initiated a facility study which is going to result in a 10-year plan. And so he's developing the RFP now. The RFP will, go out sometime in the early part of the spring. He'll come back. We'll select a vendor, later spring. That report will probably be developed over the course of the summer, maybe into the early fall. And somewhere, as we're gearing up for the next round of budget, we'll have a good, meaty facilities plan with some recommended priorities to look at. And then I think at that point, we go back and, with the Board of Selectmen, with our facilities folks, talk about what this 10-year plan should look like and, have some different priorities. So we've got some, placeholders for the time being here in the bonded capital plan, just to alert folks that it's on our radar. The last piece I would just call out to you is, again, we've been engaged in a multi-year elevator replacement process, and so there are funds being designated for this proposed referendum, and then for 25 as well. The next elevator that's up for replacement is at Cider Mill, and then the final one is here outside in the media center. That's it.
Okay. On to review and discuss the Middlebrook schedule.
Great. Jory, welcome. Or welcome back. Please.
Just had a Price is Right moment.
Come on down.
Come on down.
Well, good evening, everyone. Of course, I just closed my computer as I sat down here, so excuse me for a second. So I believe the board has a copy of the slide deck I'm going to go through right now, and it's very similar to the slides that I shared with parents last night in a parent meeting at Middlebrook. So the board will be familiar with a couple of these slides because it's obviously trying to repeat that same message of where do we start, and that certainly starts with our vision and the portrait of the graduate. And so I won't take too much time to speak to it specifically, but just to highlight the fact that everything that we're doing relative to this schedule is it starts from this, and it is geared towards that whole piece where we're trying to work on making sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're trying to help students develop these attributes in a 21st century world, and all of the skills and qualities that we want in our portrait of the graduate. So I know that's a broad brush of that, all of that comes in place here, but I wanted to make sure you remembered that. And slide 3, again, is a repeat, but it really just talks a little bit about that, why the schedule change, and reminding folks here that we want to make sure that we recognize some of those drivers for the change, and that being that we're trying to provide more time for mathematics. The current schedule is insufficient time for that independent practice of reading and writing, and that the SPED intervention students and intervention students have limited access to STRIDE classes and word language, and that the current schedule has a lot of minutes dedicated to the transition from one class to the next. This new schedule will provide several things. It'll provide that instructional framework we need for both ELA and for math. It will offer that opportunity for slowing the pace of the day a little bit, not such a rushed pace of a 42-minute class and move on, but also an opportunity to have an increased and deeper learning and an opportunity for more personalized instruction as well, and to try to reduce those barriers for SPED and STRIDE intervention students, and then also create space for the new STEM class. So I'm running through these a little bit quicker just because I know you've heard them before, so slow me down if you'd like. This is just another reminder of just a little bit of the history since 2018 and some of the models that we've looked at together, and also an understanding that this process has been one that we've tried to include the board and certainly our community and as a whole to make sure that they understand that there have been several models that we've looked at, and these are the last few models we looked at most recently. So the next slide, slide 5, talks a little bit about what instruction looks like in a 60-minute class. So, of course, let me get my hard copy here because I'm looking at mine. This has the small screen, and I'm realizing my eyes are not what they need to be right now, so forgive me for that. But a big piece for the math is that you have heard certainly Dr. Denton speak about it quite often, but the need to get to that 60-minute mark as being the sweet spot to deliver our math. And in order to get to the 8 units of instruction that we certainly want to try to accomplish, which would be an increase and an improvement in what we're able to do right now in all 3 grades, and that we would, this is going to give us a chance at success of getting through the curriculum as we should. As far as ELA is concerned, we have this plan will give us the opportunity for have an integrated ELA program where the instruction will provide an opportunity for a comprehensive literacy instruction aligned with the instructional framework that are based on standards. There is plenty of conversations that are happening right now with our staff to talk about what do those components of a lesson framework look like, and that includes the mini lessons, the opportunities for read alouds and demonstrations, as well as navigating increasingly complex tasks. And students will, in a lesson, will engage in both a reading and a writing mini lesson or a word study. They'll have the opportunity for studying mentor texts and words, in addition to demonstrating writing techniques and growing an appreciation and understanding of both academic and literary language, and how both are used for effect by writers, including themselves. What this also does is provides a larger chunk of time for students to get a deeper interaction between teachers and students, preserves our grade level structure, which, as you know, is an important part of what we want to continue, continues to include a common planning time, reduces the number of transitions from our present schedule, and it also provides us an opportunity to complete full instructional episodes as designed through the Better Lessons folks in IM and Teachers College. What the research tells us is that students and teachers need to have time together to be successful, and they will have that time to reflect on their learning as well. And then the longer period also provides those opportunities for students to develop higher order thinking skills, explore knowledge in depth, and have substantive conversations, making connections beyond the classroom, and acquire research and organizational skills. Again, I will say that a lot of the language here you'll see is very similar to the language we use relative to the 80-minute block. So there shouldn't be a surprise really for you to know what that language looks like. So let me try to get into the examples here. On the left in the screen and in your packet, what you're seeing is the current schedule. And the example we gave here is a current 6th grade schedule, which is an 8-period day of 6 academics and 2 stride blocks, and there's also a lunch period, of course. All classes meet daily. The class periods for academics are 42 minutes long, and what that means is there's an average of 210 minutes per discipline per day. On the right is a proposed schedule of a 60-minute lesson, and this is 4 just to walk through the day a little bit, it's a 4-minute team base, similar to what we have now. It's a 6-period day because now 4 academics meet and 2 stride classes meet. So a total of 6 periods from a student perspective. Still have a 30-minute lunch. And then 4 of the 5 core classes meet daily. And as you can see at the very bottom of this screen on the right, you see that 1 class would drop every day. I'll explain that a little more detail on a later slide. But the core academics are between 60 and 62 minutes, and the reason for that discrepancy is there's 2 different models I'm showing you today. One with a flex block and one without a flex block. I was asked today to please rename that to something else, so we'll come up on a nomenclature, but we'll get to a point where we're worried less about what we call it and more about what's happening. So in this schedule you're looking at here, this has a core time frame of 240 minutes. I'll just remind you again, compared to presently 210 minutes. Or if we go with a 62-minute schedule, which is another one I'll show you tonight, it's a 248 minutes over 5 days compared to the 210. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. So the next slide is really showing you the 2 proposals next to each other, side by side. And the most significant difference between the 2 is you'll notice on the right side the block of time that's circled that says flex. And that flex block is something that our staff has identified as an area that we will cover 3 things in that flex block through the course of the week. It's an opportunity for independent reading, for math practice, and for team time or team huddle time. Otherwise, the 2 schedules are very, very similar in that it's we still have the team base. There is still a 6-period day, and the stride classes for the schedule on the minutes, stride classes for the schedule on the right are 40 minutes each. So those are really the highlighted moments of the difference between those 2. Okay. The next schedule gives you kind of an idea of what it looks like over the course of 6 days. And just for the purpose of trying to follow along here, what might make sense is if you look at the science class that in this example is shown in the first academic block on day 1, in the second academic block on day 2, and you see where it goes. 3 on the 3rd day, 4th on the 4th day, and then on the 5th day it drops. And then on day 6, it would come back to being in that first block again. So, and all the other classes follow suit. They go in that same rotation. The idea that, one of the parent questions from last night, I just wanted to clarify at the get-go, is that when you look at this schedule, this does not imply that every day, day 1 is going to be a Monday, because that would imply that every time you come around to Monday, that world language drops every time, and therefore you'd have, as this one parent described it, a 3-day weekend from world language, and that's not the case, because as soon as we have a shortened week of any sort, or there's a holiday, it's never lining up again to be Monday being day 1. So that's going to be a rotation that happens not unlike what we have now. This is the example of what the schedule looks like without the flex. You'll notice that the things that are static in this schedule are when the stride blocks meet, and in this example it's that first period before the academic one, and in that 4th slot after the 4th slot, which is the academic 2, and then also lunch. So those 3 periods are static, but the rest of them rotate throughout the schedule.
So, I'm sorry, team base, lunch, and stride.
And the 2 strides
Are 2 strides
static
are static.
time frames, but the thing I just want to be careful is that obviously the stride classes that are meeting are different from day
Right.
to day. So
But the carve-out,
Right.
that's
the stride
skeletal,
block
that's always...
does not rotate.
Okay.
Correct. Thank you for that. So the next schedule is basically looking at the same thing, only now what does it look like with the flex block involved? And for each grade level, the flex block is backed up to either a stride block or a lunch block, so that it's just an opportunity for some flexibility in minutes there. And what you'll notice about this too is that the schedule is the same sort of setup, just visually it's meant to give you that opportunity to see the colors the same way that you can follow science, and what is that, kind of in a light red. to follow the ELA in that yellow color, the math in what looks like a kind of a off purple, and the social studies in more of an orange color. But you can see how it rotates through the week for the kids and for the staff for that matter.
So, I'm
So if
sorry,
I-
can I just ask?
Sure.
So in this example, flex backs up to lunch. When you said depending on the grade, it might back up to a stride. The first stride of the day, possibly, or would it be that latter, the stride at the end of the day? Like, I'm just curious if it would be starting, or would it be one for each grade? So there would be a grade that would have the flex, that would be right after that first stride.
So if I'm understanding your question, where in the day, is it going to be after that first stride or not?
Yeah.
No, it would not be.
Okay.
It's
Later.
lunch or later
I just,
in terms
okay.
of that.
Lunch or later, okay.
And there's some logic to our thinking there too, that when you look at this particular schedule, you're looking at where are the academics, where are the breaks, and is it a heavy morning, heavier afternoon
Right.
sort of look?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah,
So the next slide gives you just a quick glance at all three grades at once and what that looks like. I don't want to just keep repeating the same thing, but you get the flavor of how the rotation of the schedule would work at each grade level. This also gives us an opportunity, if you'll notice that the times will allow us that opportunity. One of the things that I talked about in the past is when we have folks that teach across schools or across grade levels, having that opportunity to be able to cover more than one grade level, this is going to allow us to do that. So this is just giving you a quick hit example of where the grade levels will land. One of the things I will say up front is that the reasoning behind where lunch is, the lunch period is hitting just a few minutes earlier than we have in our present schedule for one grade level, and a little bit later than we have in our present schedule. Just that's one other change that we have present to this future schedule. And then this next slide is really just to look a little bit deeper into the maybe yet unnamed flex block. But it's an 18-minute period, and I'm really happy to share that in our scheduling meeting today, I think we were able to really nail down an understanding that that time is going to be used for reading, math, and team huddle time. And I think it's what's very clear for our staff is making sure that they understand this is not an additional prep for them, it's not an additional expectation of time for them, but it's an opportunity for students to have some independent time work. And also gives an opportunity for the teams to have their huddle at least one day a week.
Will all the students be present on team
So
in that time?
we will coordinate that so that at certain points there are the opportunity for the students to go to an interventionist, for example, and at other times they're going to be on team. So that requires a little coordination so that the teams know what are the days where everybody's on team, what are the days where they're not. But the level of independent work and where the child's doing it is going to matter less then, because what they're actually doing, whether that's independent reading or working on some math practice or doing a team huddle. We don't want to make sure they're not missing the team huddle time, obviously. More often than not, that's the beginning of the week. That's usually where they do it, either as a wrap-up or a beginning of the week sort of thing. Okay. The next slide, I think you recognize when we talk about the portrait of the graduate. And,
I'm sorry. Do you mind if we just go back to the flex for a minute?
Sure.
Is that okay? I don't need to break your flow for a minute. So it seems we've narrowed it down to these two. One has the flex option and one doesn't. I'm just thinking about, I think, the flex, and I'm just wondering where is it kind of in relation in terms of, staff support and having that time. And is the 18 minutes, I mean, is it enough to accomplish kind of what the goals are set out for it are? And then I think one of my kind of concerns is, overall, are we sufficiently protecting instructional time? So does this flex block give us the ability to perhaps curtail the usage of special schedules in the building that then would allow us to keep to like our regular order? Does that?
I understand your
Yeah,
question.
okay.
So, staff support, I can share that we have, we've been surveying teachers fairly regularly and have asked for their input on these final, as I've been calling them, the finalists. And
Yeah.
the folks that have responded so far, to the tune of about 62%, are in
Okay.
favor of the flex schedule,
Okay.
the one with the flex period.
With the flex,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. In fairness to that, there's still some folks that haven't weighed in yet.
Yeah.
But, what do they say in politics? If you have a, 30 or 40% of the precincts coming in, what is it looking like? That's kind of how I feel right now.
Okay.
That there's a percentage of folks that have already responded, and there's still more I want to hear from. So,
Okay.
But that's where we are today. Okay. Regarding the instructional time, I don't see this flex period as something that's going to impact whether or not special schedules happen or not. I do think that there's still going to be, we're still big enough where we're not able to fit in a auditorium as a whole school yet. So we need to have, whenever there's an assembly or a need to have a presentation of some sort, it requires at least 2, if not 3 assemblies, and this wouldn't give us that opportunity to do that. But, the point where I think you were going is just that preserving that instructional time is certainly something that we still want to do.
Yes.
That idea of laying all of that out before the school year starts and then preserving that time and making sure
Yeah.
that we're not,
It's not getting-
any interruptions.
yeah.
Right. There are some givens where we know there's going to be standardized testing that we're going to block in and schedule. We know that there are certain assemblies that we do annually, like the Veterans Day Assembly that we hold very dear. So there's
Yeah.
still going to be those moments where there's going to be some interruptions.
I was just kind of trying to, what type of flexibilities does the flex block provide? So that's,
Right.
Yeah.
So, a big
Yeah.
part of it is going to be, it provides that flexibility for the team to be able to manage some of their team huddle time, because right now they're biting into something else to be able to do that.
okay.
It really, with the thought of fewer minutes in ELA, it provides that opportunity for having independent reading just carved out during the day for the kids, as well as some independent math practice. But it also, it is an opportunity where interventionists and or special educators are going to be able to meet with students and work with them as well. So, did I
Thank
answer
you.
all of your questions?
Yes, you did, thank you.
You're welcome.
Like a stride question. It looks like between stride blocks, the teacher's going to have 20 minutes between each stride blocks where they're not teaching. How do they feel about that? The planning time is more broken up.
Right. So we talked a little bit about that today as well, and one of it's good and bad, right? On the good side, it gives that opportunity where they can have a pocket of time that gives them an opportunity for meeting with their like partners. We don't necessarily call them IETs, but for lack of a better term, but one that I know you all understand is for them have an opportunity to meet with their like partners. We obviously need to make sure that it meets the standard of contractual obligations for prep periods and prep times, which we're doing right now. But there are pockets of these times where it may be 21 minutes between some and 4 between another, but also a 59-minute chunk in between another. So there's a lot of different opportunities where we can be a little flexible about how that'll play out eventually. Okay. Okay, move on. So, again, I won't take a lot of time talking about this because you could probably speak to me about this, but the portrait of the graduate is very much alive and well when we think about trying to build these self-navigating expert learners and the desire to really make sure that children are building the skills necessary to build on their own learning and their skill building for that matter. I don't want to just ramble through that, but I just want you get the idea. This slide again is a bit of a repeat from a previous, but it's really just to bring back that thought of some of the work that's still ahead of us to make sure that we're ready for the fall, and that is to make sure we're providing the right amount of professional learning and meeting teachers where they are, to make sure that we have not only the folks within the building, between the teachers themselves, the coordinators, coaches, and admin, to talk about those targeted areas of instruction that we need to focus on, but also learning from other middle schools that have done this before. As my father would say, learn from my gray hair, learn from their gray hair and their growing pains as they went through different changes. And then also making sure that our folks from Better Lessons and TC continue to help us through this process. And we are still looking to find an opportunity to pilot this at some point in the spring. That's going to take some creative work that Dean Whalen has a better handle on than I do, in fairness, to be able to take 6 academics and turn them into 4, and where do the kids go, get the classes that are dropping, that sort of thing. But he has an idea and a plan for that. So other questions?
Sure. The proposed schedule and the proposed flex schedule, what do teachers like and dislike about each?
So the likes are that they like the rotating schedule, that the classes don't always meet at the same time every day. They certainly like the more minutes based on whatever discipline you're in. They certainly don't like the idea of losing ELA partners. They want to make sure that they understand how they are going to be, for example, science teachers on a day where they're doing a lab want to better understand how's that going to work when a class drops and then it adds the next day. And one of the pieces to that, we really haven't talked too much at school yet, but some of the feedback has been that hey, how's that going to work out? The class that drops is the first period the next day. So the positive to that is if you are a science teacher, for example, and you're doing a lab on say Tuesday, on Wednesday the class that dropped is going to be your first class that next day. So the idea of having to break it down and putting it back together, short of an ice melting lab, you'd be able to do that. So those sorts of things we're going to talk through in the coming months. I think that the staff also wants to know where they're going to be next year. Where are they teaching? What other changes might happen relative to placement? But as far as the schedule itself is concerned, they see some real possibility with the 18-minute flex. Others wonder what that's going to look like, and they're worried about it being free from administrative duty, as opposed to just what we've talked about even today, where I think we nailed down that language a little clearer even today with the staff, to say that it's going to be one of those 3 things: math, reading, or team time. Other feedback just talked a little bit about questions for what does dismissal look like, what does the morning look like, what are the responsibilities, and there's not a whole heck of a lot that's going to be changing relative to that. There may need to be some trade-offs for time based on the schedule with the flex requires some creative work specifically on how much prep time the teachers have. So we want to make sure that we've carved that time out for them. So what does that mean? It means 10 minutes a day, less maybe for team time and more prep period there, or a trade-off of a day a week where it's not a team meeting but it's a prep meeting, that sort of thing. Those are the kind of the details that they're still asking questions about, not sure about, but the committee is having conversations about what would our preference be. I think I've answered most of the ones that they've highlighted.
So the flex block, so it falls, at least for the 6th grade that we're looking at, it falls after academic 1. So do the kids stay with the academic 1 teacher?
So that's going to be flexible. The idea that where the students are living, we haven't talked about specifically where the kids are going to be living in that flex block. So the idea of having them, if we feel it's necessary to move to be with a certain teacher for any reason, we certainly could. But in the past, when we do those kind of extended team base, that always has been a fallback position that we go to. The kids know where they're supposed to be, teachers know where they're supposed to be. That's certainly another option. If if we grow into a model that allows for some flexibility in that time, where that gives a student an opportunity to go and meet with a teacher, that would be an opportunity to move in that moment, but certainly not the way we're going to start out.
Okay, so could it end up that one teacher ends up with most of the team, another teacher ends up with
No,
only a handful?
no.
Are you going to limit it that every teacher can only have, yay, so many kids?
Yeah, I think that as we start to live it, might we get to a place where a teacher could have that period for additional preparation or making parent calls and that sort of thing, while the other teachers house the kids, if you will. Yeah, I could see how that might happen, but at least to start, we want to make sure that it's clear what are the expectations for that period from a staff point of view, from a kid point of view, where are they going to be, who's responsible for them.
Okay. I know you guys have thought about this a lot this is a me-only thought. It sounds like it's going to turn into a study hall period for these kids. And I know that's not what you're thinking, but from hearing it and thinking about it, that's where my mind is going.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you guys feel the need that we have to have a flex versus not?
So this came from the discussions with staff, and they were asking for this kind of model. I kind of joked with Kevin a couple of weeks ago that maybe I did too good a job of talking about that skills block in the past, and so there are qualities about that they like, but not to the extent of time that we talked about in the 80-minute block. So I have more confidence that it's something that they're seeing benefit in and seeing a positive, but it's also that opportunity where we recognize that there are fewer minutes in the day for students to be able to independently read or to practice in the math and or have that opportunity for team huddle time. So this shelters a little bit of that time that is usually stolen and borrowed from other times right now. Right now in a 42-minute lesson, teachers are carving out time for that independent reading, and now this gives a time that's dedicated to that. So I think it's seen as a positive in that regard.
Okay, so if teachers aren't prepping for this flex period, is it up to the kids themselves to decide what they're doing during that time? Whether
No.
it be independent reading or math?
No, we'd assign that early on. I think that where the flexibility would be from team to team, what's happening on Monday versus Tuesday versus Wednesday, but everybody knows that this week, these are the days that we're doing something. Another reason why that's important is that if students are leaving to go to some level of support services, we want to be able to have that identified so that we're not doing for example, a team huddle in that time slot, so that the child who is off getting their support services misses out on that. So that would be outlined ahead of time.
Okay.
The other important part of that is making sure that teachers know where the students are supposed to be, and the students know where they're supposed to be. It's not this, has anybody seen Jen and where she's supposed to be kind of thing. So.
Okay. Okay. I'm not convinced yet, but
I'm not convinced of what. Let me help.
just the whole, I haven't wrapped my head around the whole flex thing.
Okay.
I'm not seeing whether I feel like that's truly beneficial versus having a few extra minutes in each core class.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we're talking about not having as many transitions, but if we're transitioning them to a different place anyway, we are, right? Like we've already added another transition
So
for the flex.
depending upon the grade level, let me just make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here. Yeah, what, I don't have it in front of me, the different grade levels, but the flex block for the one example we have here is right after an academic.
Right.
So that does not need to be a transition period between that. Lucille, if you don't mind going to slide 7, I'll look at
I
you.
think that's what I was asking, right? So if we have a flex period after an academic, do the kids just stay in that academic? And you were
Right.
thinking not necessarily.
No, in this it would. What I'm not. Let me see if I can pull up the.
So would the kids stay in science and just have a flex time?
But that's where their
in
flex
science?
period would go. Yes. Yes.
So if they have science,
Right. That's what I was asking before, and I thought I got a different answer.
Well, the different answer, in fairness to your ask, is that in the model we're looking at right now for grade 7, for example, has the flex block after a stride, but it's a flex block then into an academic, so that flex block and academic would be the same grouping.
Right.
So it's
then
not
they really
adding-
are going to the same, they're staying at that teacher until maybe
Right.
later on in the year when you
Right.
guys decide we should break them out
Right.
differently.
So it's not an added transition. There's still a transition that's happening from the stride into the flex, but that flex into the next academic is not a transition.
Okay. I'm sorry,
And-
maybe I misunderstood.
I probably misspoke, so I don't blame
I got
yourself
it.
here.
I got it.
And then the third grade level, I'm just confirming that the same is true, that it's an academic into a flex into lunch for the other, the third grade level.
Okay.
And part of the reasoning for showing you this one in such detail and not necessarily others is that this schedule is, the caveat here is also making sure that we're tuned into the fact that we have folks that are in other buildings, and therefore, can they perform their duties in our building before they leave the other one, because it's a rotating schedule. How do they do that? So, the idea of having that, for example, the stride block being early enough in the day for them to be able to do those and then leave to do the other buildings, that sort of thing. Okay?
So, and I'm sorry, were you?
So how are you going to decide between with flex or without flex? What's the next?
Well, I guess the part that I wanted to really kind of highlight tonight is I'm pretty excited that we're at a point where we're choosing between two very similar schedules that have a 60-minute academic block and roughly a 40 to 45-minute stride block. And there's pretty little variation between the two. They both have the same rotating schedule. They both have the static lunch and team base and stride blocks, but that even when you look at them side by side, you can see they're very, very similar, and the only real difference is that 18-minute slot. It's pretty overwhelmingly in favor of one over the other if you ask the staff at this point, relative to the tune of about 62%. So, it seems like it's a, like I said, the early precincts are telling us one thing. So I think we're at a point where we're pretty close. I think we have to start thinking about some of those details of, what do we need to do to accommodate stride teachers who maybe don't have a 30-minute block and that sort of thing.
Joe, can I weigh into it? It's just as you're presenting this and I'm thinking about it, it seems to me, as we've done other things this year, if there was a lot of investment in the flex block, we could actually set it up as a pilot for some or all of next year. You guys get real clarity about the goals and then measure them. And if they decide the flex block's really not meeting the stated goals, then it didn't look like a huge leap to me to revert back to a schedule where you're feeding some additional minutes to the core, but also to stride. It looked to me like the most substantial change in that, at least on paper, was just the 10-minute shift of the lunch period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that is something we did talk about. We even talked about the possibility of, could both schedules be something that we have in our lexicon as a regular, that there's, what's the frequency of the flex block schedule being something that meets, say, once a week or twice a month or et cetera, that sort of thing. So that idea of having the schedule and then at some point being able to say what is and what isn't working. We're gonna need some timeouts along the way next year as we get into this and recognize that we want to keep checking. What the parents asked last night, how are we going to measure success? How are we going to know if this is working or not? So there are points at which we're going to need to hit the pause button and just do that check-in and say, what is it that's working, what's not, what do we need to adjust?
So when do you guys hope, to follow up on your question, when are you guys hoping to share with the public your final decision?
Tonight, no. Just very soon, because I think that really what I was saying earlier, I was excited to say that we're at that point where I feel like we're splitting hairs to a certain degree between these two. I would certainly like to hear from more of the staff. The timing of this is such that their first opportunity to really look at this as a whole group was the Friday right before break.
Yeah.
And so sent out that opportunity for them to give that feedback. Some did, some didn't, and then it's been trickling in as the week goes on this week. We just had a staff meeting yesterday where I reinforced that, hey, I want to hear from you, I want to hear your feedback and understand better what your questions are. Because we really ask the questions, do you have a preference? What do you like about it? What don't you? What do you still have questions or needs about? And that's the things that we're sifting through as a scheduling committee too. So I would like to hear from more of the staff, and there were a whole bunch of them that were answering today, so that's helpful too. And I think that maybe speaks to your question, Nicola, about, when are we going to be at a point where we're ready to move forward? And I'm optimistic that it's very soon. I'd hate to give it a date, but very soon. Okay.
I think Mandy is trying to talk.
She can't. She can speak.
Mandy, you can talk if you want to.
We just can't hear.
I can't hear.
I don't have her on mute.
She hears her.
Hey, Manny, can you hear us, and can we hear you? No, we can't hear you at all.
Does she?
Thanks.
She might just call. She can talk.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Hey, hi, we can't hear you. We're just gonna put you on a speaker.
This is called demonstrating
Here.
flexibility
Sorry, I was just
and
curious,
adaptiveness.
the students, is this the only time they can have intervention? Tori,
Tori,
you had mentioned that
they'll
they'll
have
have intervention.
intervention during the flex period. Oh, forget it.
We found you.
I think we can hear you now, Manny. Can you hear me?
I think her question though was around.
Is it the
Yeah.
only time?
You were talking about having services during the flex period, but it's
Right.
not limited to the flex period,
Correct.
correct?
It's not, that is not the only time. In fact, there's still some need for students to have a choice between stride classes and their intervention, or a choice between world language and, say, an academic lab. What's nice about Middlebrook is on that continuum of 6th to 8th grade that students are taking fewer days of an academic lab in their, if you will, their journey through middle school. And one of the things that this schedule is going to allow us to do is still have that introductory class for world language. And what it means is that we'll set aside those kids that we know need to have an academic lab X number of days a week. Is that one day a week? Is that twice a week? What it is? Is it possible to do that during the flex block? Maybe, but more often than not, it's going to be opposite a world language class, which they then would go to that world language class on the days where they're not in an academic lab.
You got.
I don't know
She's
if she had any other questions, but
We'll fill her in.
okay.
Yeah, and I guess just
And she can
thinking
always
about
reach out to
the question, one of the trade-offs with adjusting the schedule was, one of their primary goals was to try to get away from this setup where kids have to choose between a stride and intervention, and that goal had to be let go.
Mhm.
Sorry about the technical difficulties. It's always something.
Yes.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. All
And-
right, no, I'm good. That was just my only question.
You're good? You were answered?
Hopefully she could hear my
Yeah.
answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yes.
No, I hear you guys. I'm good.
Okay.
Go back and watch it.
What else can I say?
I think it's tremendous that we're here. So I want to congratulate you and the staff and the teachers and everyone for all their work getting us to this point. I kind of like some of the ideas of perhaps starting with the flex piloting, seeing how that could go, looking at some of those different iterations, being that the differences between the two are not that far apart, and it'll give us the ability to kind of work within the models a bit, especially since there seems to be an inclination to move towards one, but knowing that it could be easily pulled back or changed or worked in another way, I think is a great place to be and start. Towards that, it would be really great if to develop some type of pilot that can kind of see some of these pieces moving in action and help inform September. And I am really kind of looking forward to the kids having a little bit more, calm in their day in terms of transitions, and also really kind of getting to spend time in their work and in their subjects. So, having been in Middlebrook lots this fall and been in classrooms and saying like, oh wow, if they just only had 10 more minutes, it's exciting, I think, for it to be happening.
I agree, thank you. It's been a true team effort, so I know
It's
I'm
been
the
a
one
heavy
sitting
lift.
here, but it's a team effort.
It's been a heavy lift for all of you. So you've had this process, and you started out with one idea, and then you had to kind of revamp and rethink and come back and kind of redo what you were doing. But congratulations to all of you for all this work and thought you put into it, because I think you've got something that's going to work. You've got to tweak things and kind of think things through, but I think you've got something that you can make manageable, and actually, I think you're all going to enjoy it.
I do too, thank you.
A lot of work, a lot of thought. Still some to
It's
go.
easy when you're thinking about doing right by kids and
I
making
know,
sure you're
I
doing what's
know,
right
but
for
it's
students.
so
That's the
complicated,
part of
you
it
know,
that, it's a labor of love.
complications of it are just hard, a lot of moving parts that you have to kind of think through and how it's going to work.
I was sharing this model with the Southwest Principals Group just this week, and they were asking for copyright. Is it okay if we, and all that? But they're watching with bated breath themselves to say that they may follow suit. So, yeah, I think I shared that before with the number of schools in the tri-state area and our area that have been talking about this, and
Yeah.
so. Yeah, go make it work, Jory, and then we'll do it. So.
Wilton always makes it work.
That's right.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
So, thank you, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you in 2 weeks.
yeah, sure.
Great.
You're gonna get sick of me. Should I just stay here?
Yeah,
Sure.
you might as
Sure.
well. and
Yeah.
Kathy, you want-
You want-
Come on.
So we're going to talk a little bit about MAP. I have my couple friends here, and Jen is on Zoom. We're going to share the results. What I'm going to do is just kind of explain the data to you, and then we'll have the principals share with you their results and thinking about the results. And I also have Karen and Trudy on Zoom, because at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about the growth of cohorts over time. So if we can just look at the next slide. All right, so the first slide here is for Miller Driscoll. We have the 3 grades, the fall scores and the winter scores. Keep in mind that in kindergarten, you don't do a fall administration of the map. You could do the next slide. This is something that I don't think you guys have seen before, but it's something that we do on a regular basis. We take a grade level and we disaggregate it into different groups. So this is all students. This is students who don't receive any support services. These are students who receive intervention, and these are students who receive special education. And again, we have their fall and their winter data here. Green is the number of kids who met benchmark, yellow is approaching benchmark, and red is far below benchmark. What we want to see is that it's going this way, right? We want to see increasing numbers of kids meeting benchmark, less kids in the red and the yellow. Make sense? It's a way of evaluating our program, kind of a thumb way of doing it. And for each of these are our tier 1 kids, tier 2 kids, and special education students. Please keep in mind that for the students here, they wouldn't be receiving services if they didn't struggle. So, right? But again, we still want to see nice growth in the number of kids who are meeting benchmark. Make sense? All right, so we can go back to the previous slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I'm going to give you a little, story behind the numbers, I guess, so thanks for letting us talk about that, but I'll do it quickly. Just so you know, we do things a little differently at Miller Driscoll, right?
We've heard that.
I know, we do. So our timing is a
Can
little
I use that
different.
line for Middlebrook too?
Sure.
Okay, good.
Sure, feel free, steal away. So our timing is a little bit different. So kindergarten took the test for the first time in December. So remember, some of those kids were 4. So fun. And our first and second grade classes took it a little bit later. So whereas Middlebrook and Cider Mill took their winter tests in December, we didn't take ours until January. So that is a little bit different there. When you look at the scores across from fall to winter, most of the time when you look at the trends over the last several years, there's usually a dip from fall to winter. So we were really excited by a lot of these scores. So I would say like grade 1 for math, where it dipped a little bit, that's probably more typical of what we would normally see. The biggest celebration for us is when we look at what the numbers were pre-COVID and where we are now. So I think, Trudy and Karen want to talk about it later, but I'm going to talk about it because it's a huge celebration. So in kindergarten winter pre-COVID, we were at 53 and now we're at 65 for ELA. For grade 1, we were at 63 and now we're at 73. So especially for those kids in kindergarten and first grade, we're seeing a huge difference. And that's also related to their foundational skills. So Chuck didn't share the details of the different strand data, but kindergarten for foundational skills pre-COVID we're at 60, and this year we're at 74. So that's a huge celebration. Huge people. We should stop right there. Right?
We should
And grade 1, but we're not, because grade 1 was at 61, and now they're at 73. So those are based, I think the growth there is based on the shifts that we've made with the curriculum. We've added in the whole Haggerty with phonemic awareness and all of that piece of the curriculum, so that's huge. I also think that the growth that we've had in math in second grade from fall to winter, where again, usually there's a dip, we're implementing illustrative math. You heard me at the board workshops. What was that? What were those words you called me? I can't remember. But we're implementing illustrative math and we're seeing some really great results based on that. So that's exciting. And then just remember the other thing that we're doing in kindergarten is play workshop, which just makes everything better, even the scores. So there we go. Other things that have been happening, we had IETs set their goals around student learning outcomes as an IET as opposed to individuals. Which has been great for their collaboration. So when they're working in their plan, do, study, act cycles, they're working together to improve that instruction to kind of bring up the whole, it's about a half of the grade level that they're looking at. So that's huge. The other piece that we rely a lot on is the information in our data workbooks, especially for kindergarten. When a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old takes a test on a computer for the first time, it's one data point. When the scores are great, we think they're so reliable, but we also look at what's in the data workbook around running records, phonemic awareness, encoding, decoding, and have big conversations about, are the scores lining up? Do we see similar things? If things are not similar, then why might that be? We do a lot of that in SRBI, where then we target kids with informal or formal intervention. Like I said, we've made huge changes in the curriculum in the years that I've been here. Grade 1 is implementing the new reading units of study. Kindergarten is making a bunch of shifts based on the new units that will be coming, and that includes much more of an emphasis on decoding and decodable text and things like that. We have additional coaching support in our building for our many, many new teachers that we've had over the last few years. And another interesting thing this year, the coaches and the interventionists are working together to share all of their resources with classroom teachers. So they have shared drives and have all kinds of information they're sharing. So next steps for us, we need to kind of dig deeper into the special ed numbers and look at why that trend isn't the same.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
So that's the reading one. Yeah. We could just flip through a little bit if you want.
So I would say
And
in
that's reading.
general, except in special ed, we're seeing some very positive movement across the subgroups.
So there are a couple of, we have some working hypotheses. One is, like Chuck said, so if students are in intervention and they aren't making the progress that we would expect, then we usually refer them to special education. So right there, those are the kids that are kind of taken out of that intervention group and moved into special education. For the reading, we're looking a lot at the foundational skills scores of the kids in special education, because that's usually the target area for the kids who end up in special ed for reading. It's usually around that decoding and that phonemic awareness piece. So that's a piece too that we're looking at. We're also looking at the amount of, time for service between kids who are in intervention and kids who move into special education. Because there are times where, when they're in intervention, they actually receive more minutes of intervention with the interventionist. And I think that's across the board in all the schools. And then they go into special education, and it's, a smaller amount of time. We talk about how that's a guarantee of service over a much longer period of time, but the intensity and the time spent is a little bit different. So we're looking at that. And another thing our interventionists are also doing that's new, kind of since we came back in January, is they're also sharing a lot of their resources with the parents. So the kids in intervention now kind of travel around with this folder of everything that they're working on. So the teacher can work on it in the classroom with those kids, and then the parents can work on it at home. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Or is there anything I forgot?
No, I mean, generally speaking, your schools are fabulous and your interventionists rock. They really do.
They did. My whole staff rocks.
Yes, they
I
do.
have to say, they work really hard. So.
They're great, really great.
And I'm glad to hear you're looking a little bit deeper into special education.
Yeah, it's tricky because there's a lot of factors, right? Kids in special ed. So.
Especially that age.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it takes a while before, even if you're doing like an Orton Gillingham kind of approach, it takes a while for all of those skills to take hold, to then be able to see a change in something like a MAP, test.
Absolutely.
So we see it in the other measures, but it just doesn't show up necessarily in this. So, and similar to the math, there's a lot of language in the math we expect kids to do. So.
Yeah.
Is it possible to just get the number of students related
Yes.
to each grouping? That would be, thank you.
I have the charts, they're just very busy. And I
I'm
thought
sure,
for
yeah.
tonight, we need
Yeah.
I could easily share the whole thing
Yeah.
with you, you can look at the numbers.
Yeah, and I think that question of intensity in intervention and versus a longer time period and sped maybe less intensity is an interesting one for across the entire district.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Across a lot of districts, probably.
probably.
So, just saying.
Chuck, if you're going to pull numbers anyway, can you pull how many kids went from intervention to special education and when they went?
Yes, I can do that. So you're talking about intervention to special ed? Sure.
Or you know what? Go ahead, why don't you add in general ed to intervention too?
Yeah.
Because then it would make the whole thing make sense.
Yeah, the transition.
I have a kind of a semi-related question. Kim Healy is here tonight, and hopefully is going to weigh in a little later about her adventure in Hartford yesterday. But Kim was on was it the Right to Read committee, Kim? I don't remember.
It's the Reading
Thank you.
Leadership and Implementation Council.
So Kim has been advocating on our behalf, so because we have some programs that are working, and you had named, but really didn't dive into details about some of the changes that we've made in our early literacy program. So would you take just 3 or 4 minutes and just talk through those changes? And we see some of the results here, but just what they've meant. And I'm thinking about that question also in light of the legislation as it's currently written today would require us, if we're not successful with a waiver, to move to some pre-selected program. And so can you just comment on what, if that reality came to be, what the lift would be there?
Okay. Well, first off, the changes that we've made I think have made our comprehensive literacy program much more comprehensive and much more balanced, especially for the younger kids. So when you look at that, the fact that we have added in Haggerty, and we start with Haggerty in preschool, and we've even done some professional development with the community preschools around Haggerty so
Right.
that they're doing it as well.
So people who don't know what Haggerty is, that
Okay.
might be listening from
Yeah.
home.
So it's phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. So it's working on manipulating sounds in words without any letters. So once you add the letters in, then it's phonics. But it's the precursor. And it's a great predictor of how well kids are going to read. So every single day, every single teacher goes through, a variety of different activities with all of the kids, the whole entire, class. The kids love it. They think it's like great, they think it's all game-based and everything like that. They have hand motions, so it's multi-sensory. But they go through a whole variety from just segmenting initial sounds and final sounds and middle sounds to deleting sounds and substituting sounds. And I know when Rosemary Rich was here, a few weeks ago, she, had you guys try some. We won't talk about how you all did, but she had you try some. So there's that. And then TC has made huge changes to their resources. They now have TC phonics units, which they never had before. And then even with their new reading units of study, a lot of that phonics and decoding and phonemic awareness is embedded within those units. In addition to that, our teachers are studying the book Shifting the Balance, which talks about these 6 different shifts in early childhood reading instruction. So things like orthographic mapping that they're doing, things like facilitating oral language, things like looking at phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, looking at vocabulary, looking at how we cue kids. So TC used to have us cue kids and say, you're reading along, well, what makes sense in the sentence? Maybe look at the picture. And now it's like, no, the cueing system is look at the word, look at the letters in the word, and try to figure out the word. Then, take your, make your attempt at the word. Then think about, okay, now with the context of the sentence, okay, maybe now with a picture clue, does it make sense? So just the way the teachers are even cueing the kids when they're having trouble with the word is very, very different and very impactful. So, and then these decodable text, it really is a true test of how well kids can read. Really smart kids with lots of background knowledge. So sometimes kids could read books, even though if you gave them those words in isolation, they wouldn't be able to decode them, just because they can kind of fill it in. Decodable books are like a little bit silly and not really predictable. So you can learn a lot doing that with the kids as well. So I think I covered all the changes.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And so-
Haggerty is a good program.
Haggerty is great.
It's a great
The teachers
program.
love it. The kids
Yeah.
love it. Like, it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
they
Sorry,
rock
the
it.
last part of my question was just about if we were kind of mandated to shift, so to speak, what would that experience be like?
Well, I think everything is a balance, right? So even though we have enhanced these parts of our comprehensive literacy, still the ultimate goal is comprehension.
Right.
And even beyond that, I guess that really isn't the ultimate goal. The goal is comprehension. The ultimate goal is that kids actually love to read, right? And that they can read text that they enjoy and that they can learn from. So I think we've made these shifts that are very much in line with the science of reading, if you want to call it that. But we also work a lot on comprehension.
Yeah.
We work a lot on vocabulary. We work a lot on choice for kids, so that you could choose the books that you would like to have in your book box. You can choose the books that you would like to read, whether they are books that are technically at your reading level or stretch or super easy. So that's a huge piece too. And that's the piece I feel like they would be taken away,
Sure.
which would be really
Yep,
sad.
great point. Thanks.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. We'll
You're
move on
welcome.
to Cider Mill.
All right, hi there. I know we were having some sound issues. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, shoo. Okay, I got a word together. All right, first, our scores unfortunately are not as positive as Ms. Coons are down at Mill Driscoll, but that bodes very well for us. I'm very excited to hear about this. But, and our mid-year scores. So our teachers and our coaches continue to prioritize the accelerated learning framework, and we focus on daily responsive lesson planning. However, we were definitely disappointed and surprised with this year's winter scores. We know that this work on the accelerated framework is really what helped us demonstrate the growth that led us to the state award for growth last year. So we plan to remain focused and adjust where appropriate. Winter scores typically do see a dip. However, it was definitely a little bit unexpected this year. As we go through, you'll see what I'm talking about. As I review the data, know that each staff person at Cider Mill is committed to doing everything we can to help each of our students attain our goal of 85%. And I will, at the end, kind of conclude with kind of going over some of the roadblocks I think that we kind of came across this year, and also specific strategies like Kathy did to ensure that we're going to see students grow. So the first slide, and it's just hard for me to see, so I know that it's a kind of summary of growth for each of our students in 4th and 5th, and you can see that in ELA, third grade is seeing some nice growth. However, this was not evident for our 4th and 5th grade students. In math, it's relatively flat, and we didn't see that. Let's see, in math, 5th grade was relatively flat, and we didn't see the growth in 3rd and 4th. Looking at the next set of data, we have kind of what Chuck was describing in the beginning. We have the disaggregated data by subcategories for both the reading and math by grade level. So I'm going to just kind of give a little summary of each. So our 3rd grade demonstrates really some good growth across all the categories, except not as much growth as we would like to see for students receiving specialized instruction. Both 4th and 5th grade need to demonstrate more growth, as you could tell by the summary chart, across all categories. When we look into the math, we see that 3rd grade shows some nice growth for students with intervention. However, in the other areas, we need to see more growth for the end of the school year. 4th grade, students receiving specialized instruction demonstrated nice growth, where other growth is needed in the other categories. 5th grade remains relatively flat for all the students, but particularly students receiving specialized instruction or intervention need to demonstrate more growth. We've done a lot of reflecting, as you can imagine, with thinking about, causes and, what was different this year or last year, and it definitely created a lot of concern for everybody. As you know, our teachers work really, really hard. They spend a significant amount of time in their IETs, really looking at the data. So one of the things that we know, and it's kind of a trend, we're a little off by different grade levels, but we know that COVID had a significant impact on our youngest learners, and right now our current 3rd grade was in kindergarten, our 4th graders were in 1st, 5th graders were in 2nd, and as we know, being remote and socially distancing is not an ideal way to kind of learn those core basic early literacy and math skills. So we know that it may take these learners a little bit more time to catch up, and we know that that's kind of a trend we see kind of across the country. We did, the first thing that we did was, because we were a little bit confounded, was really do what we call empathy interviews with the teachers and trying to figure out kind of what they thought. Same teachers, one cohort of different kids, but there's not that much change from last year to this year. So trying to really figure out what we possibly did differently. One of the things that we had worked on with central office, because Chuck has gotten a ton of feedback that, and I have given him this myself. So in an attempt to accommodate the amount of days that we were testing, we did try a new schedule. And in an attempt to minimize the number of days, what it did was it extended the amount of time on each tested day that our students were in their seats potentially testing. We do think, and this came out loud and strong, it was actually the number one thing that teachers felt, was that just developmentally, the schedule that we piloted just didn't do well with our students. We had some students who were seated up to 2 hours for that testing block, and although we were thrilled to have less testing days, we don't think that it quite worked out for us. We'll talk a little bit in a minute what our revised schedule is going to be for the spring, but we definitely think that that did not do well for many of our students. Additionally, I don't know if you guys remember, but right when we took, I don't know if Middlebrook took it the exact same time we did, but we had a significant amount of absences during our testing window, the days that we gave the test. And we did not, in this new schedule that we were piloting, really provide time for makeup. We kind of wanted to say, all right, we're going to do testing on these days and really limit how we did makeups. And so I just think that, there were many things that didn't work out with the schedule, and we've done a lot of reflecting and thinking about what we're going to do in the spring. So strategically, we've been obviously thinking a lot about what's going on. We know that right now the good news is that we are in the prime learning time now. We did test a little earlier this year than we have in previous years. That means we really have the long run is now, where everybody is really focused and lots of good learning time. And so we are going to continue to really focus on this accelerated learning model and really rely on our data notebooks, exit splits, and other evidence to monitor our students' progress and to respond in the moment. We've done increased progress monitoring for those not yet meeting benchmark targets. Kathy spoke to you guys about, for example, the Haggerty. We, this year, didn't have to use the Haggerty for the full grade 3. We are using it for students that did not meet benchmarks as needed, but we also use a wide range of other progress monitoring tools to really make sure that too much time is not going by without students demonstrating growth. Let's see, what else here? During the teacher interviews that we conducted, we really asked the question, what do you think's positive when you see growth? What's positively impacting your students? We really talked to teachers who had growth in, for example, reading, and maybe their kids didn't have as much growth in math. And then we talked to teachers who had more growth in math and maybe not enough in reading. And there was not a lot of patterns. The data was pretty much all over the place, and it wasn't consistent with patterns from last year either. So there wasn't anything that was really clear in the data. And so we asked the teachers kind of, what do you think worked? And things that came up were things like Math Accelerator, Math Exemplars. And so what we're doing is having an intentional, focused implementation of the strategies, such as what I just mentioned, that worked, and making sure that everybody's using it in all of our classrooms. The other things that we talked about is what kind of instructional decisions. So, for example, something came up where a lot of teachers didn't feel like they had enough access to short text with questions that really mirrored the academic language of the tests. And so we made sure and checked out resources with Trudy and Karen, and even purchased another ReadWorks, I think it was, that has short passages and has some of the language stems that will really help our students become more familiar with the language. And then our leadership team and our IETs, after kind of getting all of these strategies, really are working individually with their teams to figure out where that type of instruction best fits. There's more. Do you want me to pause for a second? Just any questions from what I just said so far? All right, I'll keep going and then I'll come back and stop. So we're also revising the testing schedule in the spring to be a little more developmentally appropriate. No child will sit for more than 60 minutes because we determined from the reports that most of our kids, it was like almost 90%, finished in the 60 minutes. This will allow most of our kids to finish but not have to sit. And then what we're going to do is students who need more time, we figured out a way of doing this through the win block, and they'll be able to make up the finish or make up as needed during the win block, which means we don't have to add additional testing days, which we are trying to avoid. Like I said, that first pilot, the pilot we did was because of the amount of days we spend testing. So as much as we appreciated the limited days, it just didn't, I don't think it worked for our kids. So the other thing that we did right in the beginning of the year, Trudy and Karen came in and met with all of our IETs to review the MAP data and really kind of dig into those learning continuums that come back to us from the MAP, and really kind of focused on what skills needed to be retaught, and especially for those students that are approaching benchmark. I'm going to just briefly talk specifically to math and then to literacy. In math, we have our two math interventionists are still working together to do what we call Math Win. Now, that's part of Tier 1. It's not an intervention. And during this, we started this last year, we found it to be very effective. About 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior to the unit, we give a pretest of the unit to come. And then Katie and Jen kind of do a little bit of pre-teaching and some front-loading of the skills that the students are going to need to be successful in the unit of study based on their math scores. And so we found that this was helpful in the past, and we're continuing that practice and prioritizing that. We've also had our teachers using the FIAB tools, which are part of the interim assessment, which is part of the SBAC. And they're using some of those tools as end-of-unit assessments, and again, helping our students become more familiar with the language, the academic language of the test. As you know, we're also piloting IM for math in third grade, and continuing to focus on 1 or 2 units in each 4th and 5th grade. So that's kind of the intensive focus in math. For literacy, we've had lots of conversations, both in district and kind of with our colleagues across the state, and vocabulary and language are a priority. And so our work with our TC consultant has focused on this work, vocabulary and language. And our coaches have done a fantastic job following up with coaching cycles to support and transfer this work into the classroom. So the other thing that we're doing is we've really focused on refining words their way and making sure that some of the strategies that maybe are not as explicitly embedded into that program that relate to what Kathy was talking about with the science of reading are more integrated and adhered to when using the Words Their Way program. We are, as you guys may remember, we had been in the middle of kind of researching the word study program, and then other things kind of came along with the district. So, we're right now working with the program we have, which is Words Their Way, and trying to optimize that in as many ways as we can. And then we will continue with Karen to kind of review the intermediate word work. You can hear Kathy's focus in the elementary school, trying to think about with the TC phonics. They do not have that up in the intermediate grades, unfortunately. So until there's a better program, we're going to keep reviewing, and in the meantime, really working to make sure that the Words Their Way program is kind of being implemented in the best way. Just in thinking about what Kathy had shared, what's important with the Or Gillingham program is that we also use that. So any student that's not meeting with success with the Words Their Way program, We also use the Orton-Gillingham methodology as an alternate method for students not meeting success in the core instruction. So that could be students with interventions, students who receive specialized instruction, but basically, it's anybody who we feel needs that type of instruction. So just because we have the Words Their Way program, it doesn't mean that we don't have alternate, more intensive, more specialized instruction available for our students if needed. And I guess most importantly, as I started in the beginning, our bottom line is, the student success is our staff's priority, and we remain committed to doing what it takes for our students to meet their goals. So we're going to remain committed and focused on this work. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
You actually did a great job explaining. I have no questions.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jen.
I just have one question. Thinking about last year to this year, has there, I know that just in general, the amount of time we're just privileging instructional time in the classroom or having different schedules throughout the day or bringing more things into the building, which are always, a tricky balance. But
Yeah.
I'm just, overall wondering about how last year we certainly made it a priority, and if that priority has still carried through.
Yeah, definitely. And that is a balance as being in an elementary school. I can't tell you that's part of a conversation we have, weekly, at least if not monthly. Because, there's part of being in elementary school is the joy of learning, right? And so, we are trying to balance the experiential components that we bring to our students with the kind of more academic feeling instruction. So we've definitely kind of kept our enrichment experiences to the minimum and not have grown them any year. We are fully implementing our field trips this year. That they are all aligned very heavily to our content areas, and we know that students learn best by experiencing and having these rich experiences. And so every decision we make to take away or to alter the schedule is made very intentionally, and we feel that every experience that we have or that we include is a benefit to our students and is not going to detract from the learning. But it remains a constant conversation, Ruth. I hear you, and we did make some changes last year that we've kept.
Yeah.
And we're very careful with, for example, I'll just use the concerts. We create a schedule. It used to be where if you wanted to go to a concert during school, everybody goes. That does not happen any longer. Only certain students go to certain schedules. So for example, when we have a band concert, we do have the fourth grade go because we want them to get excited about playing instruments, right? They've never experienced that. So we very intentionally have the fourth grade go. The way we make, and then we limit for every kind of like, for the spring concerts, we'll only have like one class go, one cohort go, and we don't have everybody attend everything. We kind of spread the wealth. The other thing that we've done is really refine the amount of time our fourth graders are pulled out for chorus and additional rehearsal. We continue to have pullout programs at Cider Mill. That's another big impact and something, strings right now is a pullout program. Band is a pullout program. What it does is it creates a lot of students going out at any given time. I'm not going to say that doesn't impact. That's a decision we've made as a district and something we may want to look at. But it's an unbelievable experience, and we see the accolades that our secondary schools get because we start our programs so early. But it is something that we have discussed, and it does take away from academic time, but it provides something else that we see how valuable it is for our community.
Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Anyone else?
I just pointed to Jory.
That means it's my turn.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Okay, thanks guys.
So I'll just open with, I just have the highest confidence and appreciation for our teaching and support staff at Middlebrook, and I think you'll see in the results here why. A little bit of that caveat that Jen spoke to, that typically we do see that winter dip, and that the schedule itself presented its own unique challenges for us as well. It was about a month earlier than we usually deliver it at Middlebrook, and Jen alluded to it as well, that boy did we have a sick building between adults and kids alike. So that was quite a interesting time. But despite all that, one of the things that I can tell you is I'm quite confident in our students' ability and our staff's ability to get that 85% goal. And the confidence I have is not only in seeing their talent, ability, and what they were able to do last year, but also knowing that where these scores are landing now are better than they were this time last year. So that sense of what the heavy lift is and what folks are doing, that it's working, it's a nice place to be sitting here tonight. So it's certainly worthy of a certain level of celebration. Doesn't mean the work is done, but it's certainly something that we want to highlight, that we're continuing these efforts with the continuous improvement using the accelerated framework. Some of the work that's happening in the building that is more of a continuation of some of the great efforts is the IETs working at truly analyzing the data, and that NWEA analysis of the growth and achievement is such a wonderful tool for the staff to use to be able to sit down with students and not only talk about how did they perform, but also, hey, what do you think? What do you think this means? We're at an age group where we're able to really partner with them to help them to not only understand, hey, here are the results, what do you think? And to even have a child be able to recognize, yeah, I kind of mailed it in that day, or hey, I wasn't feeling well that day, but I'll be able to put forth a better effort the next time. Or to celebrate, the other end of that, celebrating some of the accomplishments that the children have made. I had a couple of teachers tell me about how we happen to do math first before ELA this year. That was just a flip from the way we've done it in the past. And being able to take the data from how the students performed in day one of testing and meet with them before they started the ELA to say, hey, I noticed you didn't take as much time as we'd like you to spend. And I, not quite a rapid guesser, but you could tell they certainly didn't spend the effort that you want them to. And that gives an opportunity to kind of put that mirror up to the child to say, hey, I want you to take a different approach tomorrow when you do the ELA. And they saw some very positive responses from that and results from that. The other thing that I guess Karen's going to speak to it later, the cohort, is that correct, John? Okay, so one of the things that I think you'll be able to see in a moment is just that we're showing some nice growth as a cohort, and I think that again is an indicator of the teachers and the students' efforts on all of these efforts and what they're working on. Some of our next steps include the review with the IETs and our data review meetings, where we're really spending some focused effort and time on our students approaching benchmark and some of the strategies to support some of that targeted efforts that are happening. And again, that comes from some of that goal setting with students as well, to understand that some of the work that they need to do and how is that going to parlay into certain levels of success in the other things that they're doing, whether that's in the classroom or on a standardized test. Our interventionists also rock, and one of the things that they also are doing this year, continuing to do, is working with teacher to identify some of the proven strategies and really to identify those areas for growth. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to just kind of hit that pause button and say that it takes an awful lot for these folks to be able to take this data, understand it, and then turn it around for a 12, 11, 13-year-old sort of kid to understand in a level that, all right, what does that mean I have to do? They're also so wonderful as teaching staff at using the IEBs. You heard Jen talk about it a little bit a minute ago, to just use as that interim measure along the way that informs some of the teaching practice and the focus areas for growth for students. And we too are focused on trying to close that achievement gap. It's something that we saw some nice bright spots in our scores last year and continue to look for moving forward. And another thing that we did, we thought that was also very positive, was limiting the number of days. Jen spent a lot of time talking about that schedule and what that looked like and some of the changes they're going to make. Those are some of the changes we made this year to just limit it, that we get to a point where we're only going to go so many days and then we're, in effect, cutting kids off. At what point you get diminishing returns, to recognize there's a need to just kind of stop them and say, we've got your best at that point. But I think that too made a difference. So I'm trying to be very brief there.
Questions for Jory? All right, if we could move to these slides to the second to last. Yeah, so this is cohorts, and we'll have Karen talk about it. What you want to look at is on the diagonal, because these are the same groups of students. So Karen, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
So follow the colors? Yeah. You got the black?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. When I was with you last, we talked a little bit about what the NWEA research team and how they've been researching pandemic recovery in the 2022-23 school year. And there are a few findings I want to remind us of before we dive into the cohort data, because we're going to see similar trends in our own data. So the first thing that the research team found, is that students lost less ground over the summer before the 2022 school year. And we certainly saw that here too. You heard me in the fall mention that we saw next to no summer slide among cohorts. The second finding was that academic rebounding in reading and math continued in the fall of 2022-23. But the rebounding is not even across years or across summers, and we're going to see that. And they found that that's especially true in reading. So we're going to see bright spots where that pays great dividends for us, and we're going to see some other cohorts that are concerning, and that I attribute that to uneven academic rebounding. The third finding was that our youngest students in the sample, current third graders nationally, they were kindergartners when the pandemic started, and they are showing the largest achievement gap nationwide with the least amount of rebounding. That doesn't hold true for us here in Wilton. Our third graders, you're going to see in a minute, are having an upward growth trajectory, but our fourth graders, who missed half of their first grade year, which is a transformational year for reading growth in this district, still remain a bit of a cohort of concern. And we'll talk about that when we dive in a little bit deeper. And the final thing that I want to emphasize from that brief is that even with continued rebounding, student achievement remains lower than in typical years, and that full recovery is still a multi-year endeavor. So what I really like about the tabulation of this data is it tells two stories. The first story that it can tell you is on the horizontal, and you see the grade levels listed down the left-hand side of the slide. And if you just follow that row across, you can see how kindergarten performs pre-pandemic, and how they performed when we came back from lockdown in 2021, and how they are performing now. And you can see that for every grade. That helps us think about our curriculum decisions, our programming decisions, how our students are responding to instructional materials, if we need to make shifts in complexity. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. So as Chuck mentioned, we're going to talk more on the diagonal. So if you'll draw your attention to the right-hand side of the slide, and if you'll look at that second row, we're going to look at our first graders this year. 73% of our first graders are reading at benchmark or higher as measured by math. And if you follow that kind of northwest, so up a cell and over left, and just follow the color, You'll see that this time last year, when the same group of students was in kindergarten, that number was only 47%. That is 26% more of our first graders are reading at grade level, and that is a huge celebration. So that's one of the bright spots I mentioned when we talked about pandemic recovery being uneven. These students weren't affected by the pandemic to the degree that we're going to see with some later cohorts. If you look at our second graders, 74% this winter are reading at benchmark or higher, and when they were in first grade, same time last year, that number was 11 percentage points lower. So again, another huge celebration. You'll see our third grade here. Third grade NWEA notes as a cohort of, that's their cohort of concern nationwide, and you'll see here that we're still 5% more of our third graders are reading at grade level in third grade than they were same time last year when they were in second grade. And then we get to fourth grade, and if you look at that pink box there, we have 70% of our fourth graders reading at benchmark or higher this winter. Last year, when they were in third grade, they were demonstrating more growth with third grade standards, with 74% of them reading at benchmark or higher. So they're not continuing the same degree of growth with the fourth grade standards. And you're going to see that again in fifth grade. In fifth grade, this is more of that uneven pandemic rebounding. In fifth grade, 70% of our fifth graders this year are reading at benchmark or higher, as compared to in fourth grade, 79% of them were progressing at benchmark with fourth grade standards. So those two cohorts are the two core cohorts in the K-8 landscape that are showing some depressed pandemic recovery there. Teachers are reporting that the complexity of text that students are navigating in reading workshop remains problematic. They're reporting that our fourth graders are having some difficulty getting texts to and from school, which if you pause and think about where they were during lockdown, when they returned to school, we did not have shared materials. So we learned so much about how to be students at Miller Driscoll, and part of that is carrying books back and forth home to school. So we're still building some student confidence there. As Jen mentioned earlier, I met with fourth grade teachers, fourth and fifth grade teachers in October, and we talked about planning for students approaching benchmark and how to use our tools, including our Blueprint for Unfinished Learning for 2022 and 23. And this past February, I met with fourth grade again to really take a look at volume, stamina, and complexity. Teachers received some tips from the interventionists about how to teach kids how to be consistent and not be book copying. And they also received some tips from their coaches around reading volume. How many books a week should kids be reading? And one of the biggest things that came out of that conversation is really building our student confidence. For a number of years early in their school career, they had an adult on their shoulder, either at home or at school. We were really scaffolding with a lot of student help and building their own personal confidence in their academic success is something that we're really working on. So as Jen mentioned, our teachers remain committed to shrinking that achievement gap so that what they move to the next grade level is a smaller gap than they inherited when those students came to them in the fall of this year. And I can assure you that there is a sense of urgency on all fronts about that. The teachers really brainstormed a lot of great strategies for approaching that work. As you look back to that chart, you'll see that our sixth graders are performing about as they did in fifth grade. Our 7th graders are performing slightly better than they did as 6th graders. And our 8th graders, which it's notable that NWA considers our 8th graders another fragile cohort nationwide, but our 8th graders are thriving. 6% more of our 8th graders are reading at benchmark or higher than they were this time last year as 7th graders. So I'm going to leave you with pandemic recovery is a multi-year endeavor. It's uneven. We have a lot of bright spots and a lot of points of celebration, and we have 2 cohorts that we're really watching closely with an all hands on deck intensity. Do you have any questions for me?
I guess, Karen, are you also perhaps working on strategies with kind of 5th grade teachers to kind of help with the transition next year to Middlebrook and 6th grade in terms of, talking about, student confidence and being able to navigate and...
Always.
Okay.
That is something that is traditional. So we are well versed in preparing kids for middle school and being self-navigating learners at the middle school level. One of the things that we're looking at with our 5th grade is we're looking more at our curricular resources in 5th grade, and are they adequate for the new learning profile when kids show up, when 78% of them are at grade level or higher. Are our curricular resources rigorous enough to meet their needs?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to math?
Sure.
You there, Trudy?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what was said. Karen summarized very thoroughly the research findings and kind of the overall profile of the pandemic impacts on specific learners and areas of learning. But I'm going to kind of do an analysis or talk you through the math cohort data. I want to focus on following the colors diagonally across so you can see the growth, and that's really kind of one of the many good stories about this data. When you look all the way across kindergarten, last winter 56% of our students were at or above benchmark, now 67%. Our first graders last year 57% at or above benchmark. Now in 2nd grade 78% are at or above benchmark. That's a huge celebration. And here we have the same transition, 2nd to 3rd grade. 3rd grade is a cohort of concern nationally, and it's certainly a cohort of concern in math as it is in ELA. We have last year's 3rd grade into 4th grade. That's our cohort of concern in math, so it's those 2 cohorts, the current 3rd grade and the current 4th grade, which I think are feeling the most impact of the pandemic. When we moved to 4th grade, last year to 5th grade, huge growth, 61% at or above benchmark to 74%. Last year's 5th grade, last winter, was at 59%, and they're currently in 6th grade at 70% at or above benchmark. And we have the same move. Last year's 6th grade is now at 81% in 7th grade. And 7th grade last year, 73% at 80% in 8th grade this year. Again, just like ELA, while nationally 8th grade is a cohort of concern, it's not for us. The other thing I just want to point out is grades 2, 5, and 7 are performing at or near pre-pandemic levels. And kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 6th grade are performing above pre-pandemic levels, so that's really good news. In 3rd and 4th grade, we're following much the same approach as our colleagues in ELA are. We are working with the interventionists. As Jen described, she talked in detail about the work that the interventionists are doing in the math classrooms to shore up prerequisite skills prior to teaching units of study. And there's more interaction between teachers and math interventionists as well. Teachers are looking at ways to shore up skills through different means of practice. The IETs are focused on what their students need. Both Karen and I visited all the IETs at the beginning of this school year to introduce the blueprint for unfinished learning and help train up the teachers so that they could maintain that data and that work and focus on students. Shorter version, we're definitely committed and engaged in accelerated learning across all the cohorts in the district. And if you have specific math questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Trudy, I just had one question specific to third grade. I'm wondering if there's been any kind of look into the connection between the performance and the IM pilot.
I think it's a mixed, it's hard to draw a conclusion from that versus what we see in second grade. It is a new program and it's fully implemented at the third grade level, so there's some resequencing and the teachers are learning. Although I will tell you, I was just in a handful of third grade classrooms today. The way those kids are engaged, the way they're interacting and engaging with math, their math language, they are completely accustomed to and have learned and embraced all the instructional routines that take place on a daily basis. The teachers are very, very keen and supportive of the program. So I don't know that there was necessarily a slower ramp up, and I don't think it's had a depressive impact. I just think we haven't seen the benefit that we're going to see ultimately.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions for me? No, I'm gonna make a comment anyway. I'm disappointed in these results. And I think if you recall last year, I told you my biggest fear is that we were gonna have a regression to the mean. And we're seeing that. We're seeing we're back to business as usual. I'm hoping that these results are a wake-up call for everybody that, you know, we didn't see a dip last year, and last year there was a great sense of urgency and focus around academic achievement. And I think we just need to bring that back.
Anything else on these, or are we ready to move on?
I think we're ready to move on.
Great, thanks Jen, thanks Kathy, Jory. Jen, Trudy, Karen, thank you very much also, appreciate it. All right, so the last item here is just a discussion about the possibility of the district participating in Project Open Choice. And so I thought tonight, just to revisit that discussion, I would just share some information with you. I'd provided some information to you prior to the break. So during the 2021 school year, at that point we had discussed Wilton Public Schools participating in Project Open Choice, but the board ultimately deferred the decision because of the anticipated and realized higher enrollment in kindergarten. And so we kind of left this on our to-do agenda to revisit, and so we're revisiting it beginning now. So just by way of background, Project Open Choice is an inter-district program that enables students to attend public schools outside the community in which they live. The statutory purposes of the Open Choice program are to, 1, reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation, 2, to improve academic achievement, and 3, to provide a choice of educational programs. Participating districts offer seats to students from statutorily designated districts. Once Open Choice students are admitted, they're allowed to attend until graduation. Here in Fairfield County, the sending districts include Bridgeport and most recently Norwalk and Danbury. Receiving districts include Fairfield, Trumbull, Eastern Reading Region 9, Westport, and Weston. Students in receiving districts also have the opportunity to attend schools in the sending districts. The local RESC, or the Regional Education Service Center, in our case, it's CES, Cooperative Education Services in Trumbull, is responsible for administering the program. And when there are more students than seats available, selection is done through a weighted lottery system. The lottery is weighted to ensure that the program's goal of reducing racial, ethnic, and economic isolation is met. The state provides what I would consider to be very modest financial incentive for local boards of education that volunteer to participate. So districts receive $3,000 per student they receive, and this incentive is provided when the total number of participating students is less than 2% of the receiving district's population. The per student grant increases when the total number of participating students grows beyond 2%. Districts also receive additional ECS funds based on the per pupil allotment. Transportation is provided at no cost to the receiving district. And should a student require special education services, the sending district pays the amount equal to the difference between the cost of services and the grant paid by the state. So here in Connecticut, the Project Open Choice program has existed for many years. The earliest form of the program was called Project Concern and was launched in 1966. Wilton participated in Project Concern for a number of years through the 70s. Beyond participation in Project Concern, Wilton has long supported efforts to reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation through its support of the A Better Chance program. In fact, for many years, Wilton was one of only a handful of communities to support both male and female residences. I think right up until the male residence closed here a couple of years ago, we were one of only two municipalities that had two residences, right? So as the board contemplates participation in open choice, from my vantage point, there are probably two distinct decisions that need to be made, and I think the second, no doubt hinges on the first. So the first decision, I think, is a philosophical one, and do we see the potential educational benefit from having non-resident students from urban environments participate in our educational program? I think that's the big question. And then the second question, which, if the answer to the questions, the first answer is yes, then the second question would need to be answered annually. Do we have room at an entering grade level to accommodate out-of-district students? Again, from my purview with respect to the more philosophical kind of question, I clearly see the potential educational benefit and believe that Wilton has a rich history of educating students from urban environments. Participation in open choice would support our goals around the portrait of a graduate, specifically the goal in developing the attribute active, socially sensitive citizens. Creating more opportunities for our students to interact and form relationships with individuals with diverse backgrounds and experiences, in my mind, will surely enrich their educational experience. I think about some of the stories we've heard over the years, anecdotally, from some of our graduates, and some of them have described, experiences of, kind of being in a bubble, so to speak, and then when they land at college and they're exposed to a much wider, more diverse world outside of Wilton, for some it's a shock. And so that's a little bit of feedback from a few graduates over the years, but something we ought to think about that. I think it also needs to be said that participation in Project Open Choice wouldn't fully address that desire. It would represent, at least for us, one more opportunity than our students currently have today to engage with individuals from diverse backgrounds. But it's, in the big picture, it's a small step. Considering enrollment and space, it would be my recommendation that should the board choose to accept open choice students, we would do so in the earliest grade, so either kindergarten or first grade. And we need to recognize and understand that once that commitment's made, those students are ours through graduation. Just from an educational benefit perspective, we have the strongest opportunity to make the greatest impact by enrolling students as early as possible in their academic careers. students that enroll in the early grades, have the benefit of receiving, our world-class instruction teachers in all of the early literacy and early mathematics foundational skills. They also have the opportunity, like our current students do now, to form friendships that will endure hopefully through their schooling with us and beyond. So kind of in that vein, I looked at the projected enrollment for kindergarten and first grade for the coming year. Right now, with class sizes as they're projected, we're anticipating averages of 19.6 in kindergarten and 19.8 in first grade. If we were to add 5 students to kindergarten, that would push the average class size to 20. If we added 5 students to first grade, that would push the average class size to 20.25. So another way to think about maybe if we're starting small, if we want to go in this direction, we split the difference and we might consider adding 3 students to kindergarten and then 2 students to first grade. That would negligibly shift the class averages in each of those grades. So adding 3 to kindergarten would push the average from 19.6 to 19.8, and then adding 2 in first grade would push the class average from 19.8 to about 20. So, cost is obviously a question here, and as I've thought about, what would be the cost impact of adding, a few students through this. I think the actual cost is kind of marginal if you think about a class that's already established. We're not hiring an additional teacher. It's really adding one more desk, so to speak, into a classroom. So adding 3 students in kindergarten and 2 students in first grade wouldn't require that we open additional classrooms, and the teacher's there, the lights are on, the materials are there. So I don't see a true ad cost, at least in this example. I wrote to you also, just in thinking about if we were going to move forward with this program, how would we start, what number? I chose 5, and I don't really have a strong rationale to defend why 5 instead of 6, 7, 8, 20. But I think, Wilton hasn't participated in this program before. I think we do need to, there are lots of questions that we need to investigate further. So it would be my recommendation if we were going to move forward, we do start small and just feel it out. It's not aside from the students, if we chose to accept them, those students are ours. We always would have a choice annually going forward if we were to accept or not accept more students. And so, it's I think a conservative approach to test the waters would probably be the best way to frame that. So just, back to cost for a second. In the current funding formula, the state provides a $3,000 stipend to receiving districts if open choice participation is less than 2% of the total receiving district's population. The state also provides some ECS funding, and the way that works, the state would provide an additional half of a student's ECS allotment to the receiving and sending district. And so the sending district for us is Norwalk. We don't get a lot of ECS funds, and so what that boils down to is about $61. So it's really not any kind of serious incentive from the state. The way I tabulated that, our anticipated ECS grant for fiscal '24 is $458,128. You take that number, divide it by the total projected enrollment, and then you get a per pupil allotment, and then you cut that in half. The transportation costs, those are picked up by the RESC. So in our case, it would be CES, and then any special education costs would be paid for primarily by the sending districts. And the way the language is phrased in the law, it reads that sending districts are responsible for the difference between the reasonable cost of special education and the open choice grant amount. So this again would be just another area of question where it'd be worthwhile to talk to colleagues in Westport or Weston, or districts in the area that have participated, and just get a sense of what that actually means, in terms of how they have encountered and managed reasonable costs of SPED and how they've interacted with sending districts to cover the differences if they've had those situations. Another important piece here that ought to be part of the discussion is just consideration of children's lives outside of school and then their participation in activities beyond the school day. We take a lot of pride here in providing a full complement of activities for kids across the age and grade spectrum outside of the classroom. And so understanding that we might have some children traveling in from Norwalk, and I don't want to make any assumptions about any particular family, but I think it's reasonable to just give some conversation and consideration to what would that mean, and how would we, if we chose to, try to provide support to a family that might need transportation if they wanted to participate in before or after school activities. So just part of the conversation. I shared with you in the information we sent, CES provided some materials. Ruth, I think that some of the copies I had that I emailed to you were misscanned, so Ruth forwarded the complete version. So you have from the Connecticut State and School Finance Project, they did a briefing in 2018, and then you have the actual language from the law. I think there's plenty of time to discuss this opportunity. There's no need for the board to vote now or anytime soon. We were asked by CES if we're going to consider participation to let them know by April 15th. So there's time to answer questions. I spoke to Chipton May at CES, and he and Eric Nyquist, who is the program administrator for CES, neither of them were able to be here tonight, obviously, but they've committed to being here at the next meeting.
Kevin, do we have a date of that next meeting that we're going to further this conversation?
I would just choose to add it to the next board agenda, so 2 weeks from now.
Okay. I just had a quick question. I know I used to be very involved with ABC, and one of the things about ABC is it's very selective of high-performing students. They're selected, prepared, and placed, and they do have academic benchmarks that they have to sustain. Does Open Choice have any sort of selection or any sort of academic benchmarks, or is it just pure lottery?
To the best of my understanding, it's just lottery. We don't have control over, which children would come here.
So just a note, I'm a little uncomfortable comparing it to ABC then, because I think it's great to have diversity and inclusion, obviously, and to be a steward of that. But I just think we should be careful comparing it to ABC in that regards.
I was not comparing it to ABC.
Perfect.
I think moving forward, we all have this information in front of us. We know that there'll be representatives from CES at the next meeting. I think similar to the way we send in questions for the budget, and then those questions get aggregated and answered. I think a similar process would be helpful on this front. So over the next couple of days, if members want to send questions into me, and I will get them to Kevin, and questions can certainly be posed also to CES for their anticipated visit.
Yeah, is there any, in the stuff you've read, is there anything top of mind, just so I can start planning and preparing?
For me, I have several questions, a lot hinging around the cost of a possible special education, special services. Yeah. So how that process would look like or unfold, whether or not that includes cost and reimbursement around evaluation services. Also, just what does special education include? We provide a constellation of services.
Sure.
To our students, everything from SRBI all the way up through. So if there are any parameters around that, or other Westport or Weston has experiences around that. I also had a question of whether that would also include services around ELL.
Great question.
And I know that Westport welcomed 8 Norwalk students to their program this year. So I think it would be really great if there's some way we can have a conversation about their experiences. And I believe that Weston was looking to shift to Norwalk, to welcoming Norwalk students, but I haven't been able to suss out whether that has happened or not. So I would be interested in, learning more about that, and not only about their experience kind of with special needs or special education, but also just social integration beyond the school day. And I had a few kind of more legal questions about the way the legislation sets this up as a pilot project. And is it an indefinite pilot project if the legislation doesn't provide for a sunset of it? It talks about having, revisiting it in 2025. And so does our obligation maintain regardless of whether the pilot ends or something?
We need a clarification.
Yeah, a
That's
clarification on that would be helpful. And I think that's kind of where, I certainly, the benefits of, racially and socioeconomically diverse schools, the benefits that those offer students, I think, exposing them to peers of different backgrounds. I think there's certainly benefits of increasing cross-cultural dialogue and, integrated classrooms have shown to, improve student satisfaction and intellectual self-confidence, and learning and integrated grading can enhance student leadership skills and leads to, further success outside of the classroom. So I definitely see many benefits from participating in the program. I just want to make sure that we have a full understanding of what that participation means.
Okay.
Kevin, I had a question. So if you take 5 students as kindergartners, just for example,
Yep.
They have to stay for like the full 13 years, correct?
We would have the obligation to educate them through graduation, correct?
Unless
Yes.
they choose to leave or move out of the sending district.
Right, that's right.
But so if you amortize that over time, just doing some quick back of so at one point we could have,
Yes, if you took 5 a year at kindergarten and held on to them?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
So 65, if we just skip at 5, in 13 years we could have 65, 70 students, and at a cost of, it could be costing our district upwards of $1 million a year, theoretically.
Where do you get the $1 million cost, Mandy?
Because if they're only giving 3,000, and I'm just using.
I understand how you're doing it. Okay.
So,
Yes.
if you just look at 13 years from now, if we have, let's just say, only 5 students, and I just multiply that times 13, which is 65.
Right.
And multiplies that times about $20,000, just because if they're only going to get $3,000. And again, this is back of paper. I know it's not the exact math, but that's something that I think this is a great conversation for the Board of Ed, but I also think it's really important for the community and the taxpayers of Wilton just to understand the potential cost amortized over several years.
Yeah,
So I guess my question was what kind of outreach can we have to get the public and the community and not just the Board of Ed? I feel like this just came really quickly upon us. I think it definitely deserves a lot of discussion with a lot of input from taxpayers and residents of the town.
Well, I think we're doing it. It's on the board agenda. The boards are publicly noticed. We can let people know that open choice is on the agenda for discussion, and invite feedback as we do with all of our other agenda items.
Is it something we want to have PTAs share?
It's a good idea. Yeah.
How many other ways we can get it out?
For sure, and I think it's whatever you would like to do to just share information and let people know it's a question.
I doubt any of us dispute the merits. I think for me, it comes down to the cost, and I feel like the state makes promises, but we're a wealthier town, and somehow our funding always
Diminishes.
And I
100%.
worry that,
Mhm.
right, suddenly this is gonna change and we might have students who need extra help or other support, and now we are fully funding. And if we get if we have to send somebody out of district, I mean, that's a pretty significant cost.
For sure, and I think these are all very good, legitimate questions and concerns that ought to be vetted. Yeah, absolutely.
I noticed there's some other towns, New Canaan, at least from the data that's on here, New Canaan, Darien, Ridgefield do not participate. Have you guys ever talked about why?
You know, I didn't. I was tracking Darien because that was public, and there was some just some media generated about those conversations earlier this year. I need to just follow up and just get a better sense of this story. I don't know anything about New Canaan. And,
New Canaan deferred their decision for next year.
Is that right?
So I believe that their timeline would be about what our timeline is now.
Right, and I don't know. I don't have any information about Ridgefield either.
I guess my other question, Ruth had many of my questions also. One of my others would be like after-school care, right? If our kids typically in a sending district, we would have covered that cost because they're our own kids. But are we now covering an after-school cost for like non-interest school students who need to stay after because they need the extra parents who work? So they've got the extra time, or do we let the parents figure that stuff out?
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure I understand. Like, because we don't cover childcare.
We don't. You're right.
Yeah.
I guess,
So that wouldn't
but
be
what
an
are we offering for them? Like, are we sending them home regardless, and then they're figuring that stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity, just like any Wilton student, the family would have the opportunity to
pay for that.
But then are we asking them to pay that?
I don't see a situation where we would be supplementing childcare in any scenario.
Okay.
Kevin, how long has Westport, and I think you mentioned Trumbull, how long have they been accepting students?
6 years.
Westport's been a participant for a long time. They've taken students from Bridgeport. I can't tell you if it's years or decades. I don't know the information about Weston.
I know that Westport currently has over 60 kids in their program.
Right.
And Weston almost 30.
Yeah, I can ask. Right. Other things, just as you're, just beginning the conversation here that you want me to look into, I'll gather some of the information and the questions that were asked.
Yeah. I'm happy to also just send those to you in writing, so they're there and anybody can.
Yeah, most of the good questions were mine. I think it was fairly controversial in Darien. I think the superintendent really wanted it, and there was a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I think I can't speak to it. It generated some media, and I read a few of the stories, but it sounded like there's some good, like always. I think whenever you're contemplating as a board non-resident enrollment, and this is an example. Just need to be just have all the questions asked and answered. So no worry about that.
So if we send one of our kids to like the Stanford Technical High School, does the state pay that? Do we pay that? Does
No,
Stanford
we
pay
pay.
that?
Yeah, we pay, and that's a different program. That's an inter-district magnet program, and so we send kids, I think, pretty annually to AIT or some other places. We send kids to the Arts Magnet program in Trumbull. That's a half-day program, but we pay.
We pay that.
And the IB program in Norwalk, would that then be open to our children?
I think it would be. That's a good question for the folks at CES.
Okay.
Because the law stipulates that.
That it's reciprocal, right?
It's two ways, yeah. And I guess, if we had a kid interested in that program, does that program have lottery? Are you competing with kids from other towns, and are you guaranteed a placement in the program? I don't know the answer to that.
And Kevin, my other question, I can write this, I just don't know if you know off the top of your head, but when we provide something like summer intervention, if these students met the qualification for summer intervention, would that be an additional fee that the sending town would be paying, or we would cover that cost as well?
No. So I think the simplest way to think about it is once we accept a student, that student belongs to us regardless of his or her home address. And so if we were going to provide intervention services, we would cover that. I think it's an interesting question to think about transportation. So would, CES provide transportation in the summer in the way that they're obligated to during the school year? And then if it's not a program mandated by an IEP, then, I don't see how we would have recourse to go back to a sending district and ask for remuneration.
Mm-hmm.
So you think basically they'll only cover if there's an IEP?
I think it's a great question that that's one that didn't come up in anything I've read so far, and so I think we can talk to some of our neighbors who've got some experience with this program and just see what some of these different nuances, how they may or may not have played out in the other communities, and what their responses were. And I think that'll be really telling.
So I think this is a great start to the conversation, and we'll have CES here at our next meeting. We'll get questions that, beyond what was just laid out at the table. And we can certainly, it'll be on our next agenda on the 16th under continued to review and discuss. So we can certainly let everybody know now.
Yeah, and just that comment that Mandy made a minute ago about it feeling rushed. It's like there's no rush here, right? I think from my perspective, it's important to have the conversation, to do the analysis. There's no rush, and
and thank you for that. I was just reading that the Lotto happens in January, so I was reading the notes from our meeting in 2021, and it felt more rushed then. And you had mentioned then that the Lotto happened in January, so you wanted to get back to them in February then. So I guess that's what I was feeling, the rush. If the Lotto has already happened and they have students who are looking for seats.
Yeah, the most recent information that I have from CES is that their own data is mid-April, and I think the last time I talked to Chip about that, he said there was some flexibility, and I think for this board, you can think about next year, you can think about 2 years, you can think about 10 years, you can think about never. And so when I say there's no rush, that's what I mean by that.
Meaning by April 15th, we haven't all felt comfortable to make a decision one way or the other.
We're not ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That comes to the last item on our agenda, besides just some future business and information items, and then a ability again for a public comment. Long-range planning is March 8th at 6 p.m. Then we will have a regular meeting again on March 16th at 7 o'clock. We wanted to remind the community, how I mentioned earlier, that on March 15th there will be a Board of Finance meeting that will be discussing the BOE budget, and that takes place at 7:30 p.m. And then on March 27th is the Board of Finance hearing on the Board of Education budget. That begins at 7:30, and that is in the Middlebrook Auditorium. And then we have a Board of Education regular meeting on the April 6th. And then public comment. The board has set aside a time at the beginning and the end of regular meetings for public comments from members of the public to share their views on matters involving the Wilton Public Schools and to help inform the board's decisions on such matters. 2 minutes will be allotted to each speaker and a maximum of 15 minutes to any one subject. For the record, please also give your name and address. Are there any public comments?
Hello. I also tried to comment online virtually, but I was not allowed. The chat is disabled, so here I am. Name. My name is Florentina Nica. I am from 9 Forest Lane, and I would ask that my name not be published in any public media publications. I understand it's recording and it's public, but having it among millions of videos is different than having it in a searchable internet worldwide published media format.
I'm just as a point of order, I know that we don't publish in the, do we publish in the minutes the speakers' names?
Under public comment.
I mean, for like newspapers or the other kind of things.
I don't have any
to my name.
Yeah, can't.
So I just wanted to put that on the record. I also wanted to comment on open choice and to ask that you vote for a resounding no. And if you do happen to have an extra $1 million in the budget over the span of 13 years, I would love to have lower taxes. So please feel free to give that to me and the other Wilton residents. And if you do also happen to have all that extra money in the budget, then I suggest you spend it on improving the academics of the school. In my experience here in Wilton, I found out that a lot of parents are spending resources having their children obtaining outside of the school academic assistance as young as kindergarten, and that may explain some of the favorable MAP testing results. But it also shows that the school isn't doing enough to meet the parental needs for their children academically. And we should maybe do a survey on how many parents are having academic assistance for their children outside of the school to find out how much help is needed. I also wanted to say that if you wanted to go to school in Wilton, your children to go to school in Wilton, then you should reside in Wilton. We are in this town because we believe it to be a safe town to provide a strong academic foundation, hopefully for our children. And all the adults members of my family and I do not voluntarily commute for 3 hours when we could have literally moved next to the train station in Norwalk, had free public beach access, and our children still go to Wilton schools. Also, I wanted to ask to please limit the amount of half days in the school because they are very hard to manage for working parents. I would prefer that they have 2 full days and 2 days fully off so that I could arrange for them to come to work with me, quite frankly, than to deal with half days. I am grateful that you did not convert the snow day into a remote learning day. At least that didn't happen. I also wanted to ask if there allows room for budgets and open schools instead for that money to be used to have a salad bar in the schools. I think it's absolutely atrocious how they have the choice of one vegetable, a carrot, or maybe an apple, or an orange, and that is all the fresh fruits and vegetables. And a lot of other towns and districts have salad bars in their schools starting as young as kindergarten because you want to build healthy habits. So there are many ways to spend the money for Wilton schools and for Wilton students. And hopefully maybe even abolish the 2013 controversial, I believe, pay to play policy and eliminate some of the economic isolation that can cause, especially for parents who may not be able to afford to pay for all the different sports that their children want to be involved in. And to ask for, please, I don't know how, but find more room for the after schools or the enrichment programs because they had just opened yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by this afternoon, there's hardly any room to register your child, even if you can pay for it. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Again, I ask please to vote no to open choice because there are a lot of things that we need to improve here in Wilton for our students. Thank you.
Hello, Kim Healy, 14 Hidden Lake Bridge, Wilton. I think most of you know me. I'm here with just a resident hat, not any of my other responsibilities in town or elsewhere, but just to inform you that I was in Hartford yesterday. And prior to that, last week, the legislature did propose a bill, SB 1094, which is the act concerning the implementation of the reading models. And basically, that act would delay implementation for 1 year to give us more time to get it right. And so I testified, and 2 others from the council testified, as well as 42 people sent in, and a bunch of, while I was there, different superintendents and reading specialists from other towns, some in Fairfield County, asking that the council or the new group that was created to review the waivers, if the waiver process goes through as it is, to give feedback on the pieces that are missing, say, from a waiver. So could you just make up a little piece of the curriculum that doesn't fit with what they've decided is more aligned with the science of reading. I did also ask that a small working group be created and that we actually, as a group, maybe not me, but people create curriculum for the state. There are many, many districts in our state that do not have any reading curriculum. So, we would provide it to them, and then we could provide it to all the districts, and then if there were pieces missing, you would be given curriculum to just implement or tailor to your needs. We have about $35 million that we were allotted. I think it was mostly federal money. We did ask that instead be not used to buy commercial programs, and that was actually another big point that a lot of us made. Why are these 6 or 7 commercial programs the end-all be-all? Are they? They're not. We know that, right? We know that, like I've heard tonight, you guys use lots of different things, and I think most towns do. So, why would we ask everyone to just buy into one or just one, because they probably can't afford any more. So, and then again, the $35 million to maybe use more for district high-level training so that they can then bring it back to their district and use it to train their other teachers and reading specialists. And then again, to avoid this waiver process, which is going to be costly. I mean, I've heard upwards of $100 million to implement, say, one of these programs statewide. So nobody has that kind of money. Every district is under stress. And we hope that they will accept, all of our testimonies and at least give us the year. And I think with the right influence, which is not me, but other people, they will consider this small group. I think they were considering it. The one thing I will say from what I was hearing today is there was a comment by one of the co-chairs of the committee, and he said that he was surprised that anyone who had less than 80 percentile on the scores, that they would have asked for a waiver. So I think there were 90 waivers asked for, and really only 3 towns or 3 districts in the whole state would have qualified, according to what his comment was, which I thought was a little inappropriate, especially, hearing about all the COVID, things that are still affecting the schools. So anyway, that's just my little update. I'm not sure, I guess you guys don't comment, but we did our best. I think the public showed up, and I hope that they, I hope they heard us. I think they did. So anyway, I think it'll be good for our state. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else, Lucille?
Yeah, there's 2 online.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Faye from 136 Scrivener Hill Road. So I also have great concern about the open choice program. With only $3,000 from the state funding, I'm sure this is going to cause a lot of extra costs for the district. We only have 4.75% property tax increase. We will have about 4.75% increase due to the school budget change. So how much more tax increase can we take? And second, I don't even think we have optimal resources for the resident students here. It's still really tough to secure a spot in the art care program. And also, it's always hard to get a spot in those popular enrichment programs. And I don't think we have resources to provide academic assistance to students with lower grades. So how can we accommodate those non-resident students without even enough resources for our resident students? And third, it sounds like there's no cap on this program. So if we take 5 students this year from Norwalk, how can this make Norwalk parents feel fair? So I think we'll probably end up taking more and more students every year, and there will be no difference from redistricting, literally. Eventually, it's gonna ruin our district and damage property values in Wilton. So I don't think anyone in Wilton will want to see this happen. Okay, so I hope you'll vote no on this program. Thank you.
Hello?
So the person just put
Oh.
his or her.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, I'm at 22 McFadden Drive. I have two students in Miller Driscoll, and I also would like for the Board of Ed to vote against the open open planning for additional students. I think the funds, like I mentioned before, that should be in consideration. Additional students every year could be added. And, who's to say now it's only 5, but every year might be more and more. And additionally, children with IEP, having that in consideration for funds as well. So please also consider voting no. Thank you.
Is there anyone else, Lucille?
No, it's not.
Thank you. Okay. Meeting adjourned.